In this project, we're going to go over some more advanced skills with ink drawing and talk about how we can create perspective and create the illusion of detail with our ink pens. So let's go over the supplies you'll need, and then let's hit the sketchbook. And so what you'll need is a fine liner pen. A 05, 02, or 03 will work perfectly for this class, as well as a sketchbook. I'm using a Strathmore mixed media vellum surfaced sketchbook that's size 9 by 12 inches. Something around this size with paper that's this weight will do really well, because it'll allow you to lay down ink on the page, but you can also add acrylic ink on top or watercolor as well. But we want to focus on creating a frame and creating an interior perspective. To do that, we're going to start with drawing a bottom frame for our image. We're not going to worry about perspective as of yet. What we are going to worry about is drawing foliage and leaves and vegetation. To start out, why don't you try drawing a small leaf kind of in the middle left-hand side of your page. To do that, I'm drawing an arcing line up and a line back down. As you know by now, I'm not too concerned with making sure my lines are perfect or straight. In the middle of the leaf, we're going to add another line, and I'm using just the tip of my pen, really lightly dotting in a line that'll have some of the veins of the leaf shooting out of it. You'll notice that this interior dotted line generally follows the curvature of the top line of the leaf. We're going to replicate this shape, but in a different angle. And we're going to replicate the interior as well. I'd invite you to add 3 or 4 more of these leaf shapes to start us off with our first little bit of vegetation for this sketch. And remember, you want to kind of keep them in this quadrant of the page, so I wouldn't go any more towards the left-hand side of the page. Keep at least about 2 inches of white space. After you've added 3 or 4 other leaves, we can start to layer in this plant by adding some leaves underneath the lines we've already created. So you notice for these shapes underneath, I'm just drawing the top of the leaf because the bottom is kind of obscured by the leaves above it. And I can continue doing that same method to create a plant that seems kind of layered and 3-dimensional. Once we have this plant done with some layered leaves behind these top leaves that we've drawn, we can now move over to the other side of the page and draw a radically different kind of plant that's going to help us frame in the interior of our garden. To do that, I'm drawing some leaf shapes that are very long, angular, kind of like blades of grass. In the same way as we do that leaf over here, or the leaves over there, I'm making sure that I'm kind of following an arc pattern, making sure that they kind of rotate almost like a wagon wheel around a central point. However, for these ones, I'm going to kind of fade out the bottoms. Once I've drawn kind of like a half arc of one set of leaves, I'm going to replicate these shapes, but just like we did on the left-hand side, I'm going to make sure these shapes appear like they're behind those blades of grass that we just drew. Making sure these shapes appear like they're behind the front ones gives a sense of space and scale, making your scene feel a little bit more 3-dimensional. You can also play around with increasing the curvature or the shape and thickness or thinness of the blades of grass or vegetation that you draw. And then to finish off this bottom frame, why don't we add some flowers or another flowery type shape down here at the bottom. To do that, I'm drawing a central oval and then complementing it with some really lovely round shapes around that oval. In order to make these flowers feel a little bit 3-dimensional, I'm making the back petals around that central oval kind of flatten out, because from our perspective or vantage point, these ones would appear like they're receding away from us, or they'd be less visible because they're curving down on the other side of the flower. In order to make sure your drawing looks full and full of life and vegetation and vibrancy, consider adding 3 or 4 other flowers down here in the middle between the plants that we've drawn on the left and right hand side of the page. And again, it's always best to layer these shapes, so some petals appear in the foreground or in front of other petals. That way we're giving a sense of scale, and again, making it look like these flowers are kind of layered on top of each other. But now that we have a way of creating a bottom layer of this interior space, we're going to work on creating the bones of the structure itself. To do that, we're going to start off with drawing the quintessential cliche house shape that you might have drawn in elementary school. And that is two vertical lines connected by a pyramid in the top. I find drawing the vertical lines easier because I can draw one line and then kind of draw a parallel or almost like trace it a little bit of the ways over on the paper. You want to make sure the shape is kind of centered in the sketch pad that you're drawing in. And then we're going to do the same thing, except making it this shape a little bit bigger. So what I mean by that is drawing another line on the right-hand side and another line on the left-hand side, making sure that this line is a little bit bigger on the bottom and a little bit bigger on the top. And drawing another triangle, making sure that the tip of this triangle where the lines meet is generally above the tip of the triangle below it. We're going to do that one more time, or maybe a couple more times, but this time we want to make sure that the line is a little bit farther away from the line before it. So you'll see how this line has more space than the lines here. And we're going to do that one more time. The reason that these lines or these kind of spaces should get larger is because as objects get closer to us, they appear bigger. And the same thing goes for how we perceive walls or windows. If it's closer to us, it'll appear bigger. That means the space between this line and this line is the same as the space between this line and this line in real life, but our perception of it when we're drawing is that the space appears smaller because it's farther away. You can see what I'm doing here is connecting all the corners of these triangles with one line that slopes upwards on an angle. We're going to do the same thing with the points of the pyramids. And now we really are fleshing out the kind of the structure of our interior garden. We can continue these lines down a little bit, making sure that they fall behind some of the vegetation we've drawn. And then I'm going to connect them on the bottom, making sure that the lines on the bottom also slant backwards towards the space behind our paper. We want to make sure that these lines don't go too far out, and we're going to use them as a guide to create some more vegetation down here in the foreground. We now have the structure or the basic bones of our scene. However, we want to make sure that it looks a little bit lifelike. And so we're going to use these basic house shapes that we've created and turn them into supporting joists or wooden framing boards that will draw the eye and make it look a little bit more realistic and lifelike. So what I'm doing is drawing them in a little bit darker and a little bit thicker. I'm adding another line to the side of these lines that we've drawn. Now remember what I said about objects that are closer to us appear larger, and we want to make sure that's true in how we draw these lines as well. That means the line that's closest to us up here should be thicker than the line that's back here. And then why don't we do the same thing with this supporting, interior joist here. However, for this one, we want to make sure it's a very, very, very thin triangle. So a line to the left that gets larger and a line to the right that gets larger. You can see how we're doing this freehand, and it might be a little bit intimidating, right? Because we don't have a ruler, and it's hard to create these lines that are exact or straight. But I find that doesn't matter as much. And like I've said in other parts of this Strathmore workshop, actually letting your pen kind of be a little bit jittery or a little bit uneven across the page can really help give your art a little bit of character or emotion. We can then focus on adding some other elements to the structure of our greenhouse before adding more plants, because after all, plants are kind of the focus of this drawing. The first thing we can do is add a little door. So I'm going to add a rectangle here that goes all the way down till about here. And I'm going to add a little doorknob. We can then add a little bit of thickness to the outside of that door. And then this is the chance to create some really interesting plants and features that make this space appear even more three-dimensional. The first thing we can do is add some vines. Here's how we're going to do that. On the right-hand side of the page, right on the right-hand side of the crease of this triangle here, we're going to draw a sweeping line that goes down and then juts up to this joist here. What we're doing is creating a forced perspective by making it appear like this line kind of is strung from that area to this area. And because we've drawn it in a three-dimensional way, our eyes perceive that this line, or what's going to be a vine, comes forward towards us, towards the viewer. We can do that again by drawing another line down with a sharper angle this time up towards the next joist. And then why don't we continue it to the other side of the greenhouse? So instead of coming towards us, I'm going to draw this line like a half circle up to the other joist. Now we can add some leaves to make it appear a little bit more three-dimensional. I'm going to start with the area closest to us. That means the part of the line that connects to this wooden beam. And I'm going to add some leaf shapes, but making sure that they're a lot smaller than the ones at the front of our page. As I go down the line, these leaves are getting smaller, and so I'm drawing them smaller as well. If I drew them the same size as the leaves up here, it would appear that they're kind of equidistant or the same distance away from the viewer, where that's not really the case. We know that these leaves have gotten smaller as they go farther back into the scene. This is a really effective way of creating a sense of distance within our greenhouse. And you can add leaves or any other elements to this little ropey vine as you see fit. However, we're not done with hanging shrubbery. And so what I want to do as well is to add some hanging pots. How I'm going to do that is first draw the pot itself. I'm drawing a very gradual curve here, a gradual arc, and then two lines that kind of jut down on very slight angles. And then I'm going to draw an oval that kind of mirrors the arc on the top of the shape. This is a little bit tricky to do, so don't beat yourself up if you find you aren't getting it perfectly the first time. This oval mirrors the top oval, but it's a little bit smaller, makes it appear like there's a three-dimensional potted plant that's hanging above us. Why don't we draw the string that's holding up this plant? So we're going to draw a rectangle kind of leading up into the abyss here, making it look like this plant is suspended in the air. And then we're going to draw some droopy leaves kind of hanging down from this plant. I'm adding a few more abrupt angular shapes here to give the illusion that these plants or these branches are kind of dropping out of this hanging basket. And you'll see ones like this that are on the other side of the potted plant are less distinct or less visible than the ones that are closest to us. The same as all the other plants we've drawn, don't be afraid of layering up the plants or the leaves that you draw. It really makes it more effectively look like it's a three-dimensional object in the space. And then I'd invite you to add some further details that you choose, whether it's your favorite kind of flower, whether it's some interesting gardening equipment, whatever you think would add some mystery or drama to the scene, feel free to add that now. I think there's one great thing about drawing vegetation or interior scene like this with plants and flowers is that there's so many hundreds of thousands of different plants to draw from. It's such a great thing to expand your skill and your use of color, but also line and shape because of the incredible variety of shapes that you find in the natural world. This is a see-through greenhouse, which means that the light from the sun comes through and helps the plants grow. That also means that there's going to be shadow. When I add shadow with ink, I do so with a couple different methods. For For the purposes of this class, I'm going to be focused on hatching. What that is shading by doing concentric diagonal lines. So I'd grab another piece of paper or a scrap piece of paper and practice creating lines with your pen. Often the closer together the lines are, or the darker you press, the darker the shading you create. With a 0.5 pen or a 0.2 pen, you can create really dynamic element areas of shading that make it appear like the objects you're drawing are being hit with sunlight. If we pretend that the sun is coming from behind the door here in the greenhouse, that means the shadows are going to be cast towards us this way. And that means the things that face us, the viewer, are going to be in shadow. That means I'm going to be using this hatching method to shade in things like this flower box or elements like the table legs because they're facing away from the sun. Now, hatching takes a lot of pen control, and so feel free to practice out on some other pieces of paper before you kind of attempt to do it on your final drawing. But you can see how any area that's kind of facing towards us or facing away from the sun direction, which is in the middle here, should have some hatching on it. This also means we can add some darker lines to the left-hand side of the supporting joists, or on this side, the right-hand side. In both cases, it's because these sides of the wooden supporting structure of this greenhouse would be in shadow. You can see how creating these strong, dark shadows can be really effective in creating a sense of scale and light and contrast. This also means we can shade in some of the leaves a little bit as well, or especially underneath the leaves. I'm going to use hatching to shade in the areas where these leaves part, where there's space underneath them, in order to draw more attention to the shapes of the leaves themselves. Don't be afraid to go over the areas of shading in order to make them darker as well. For things like these pots, they cast a shadow. So they're not only in shadow, but they also cast a shadow on the floor. And that means you can extend the hatching down onto the floor itself. So at this point in the class, you should have an interior scene of a greenhouse that hopefully has some perspective in it, that has multiple elements that get larger as they come towards us, and that get smaller as they go into the page. Hopefully you have at least 3 or 4 different kinds of leaves or vegetation or flowers in your scene as well, and some shadows and shading. Now the ball is truly in your court, and you can choose to add watercolor over top of this scene or acrylic ink paints. Choose whichever one you enjoyed using the most in this class. I'm so excited to see how you finish this botanical greenhouse scene and what other details you might add yourself. Be sure to comment below in the discussion portion of this class to let me know what you picked and what kind of method you found most useful. For this project, we really did an overview of perspective and didn't get too deep into the details. You got an overview of how to create a sense of scale, space, shadow, and texture in your scene as well, hopefully getting a groundwork in how you can add some lovely flowers and vegetation to your landscape art as well. To add more detail to this final drawing, we can dig deeper into texture, shading, and light direction. First, we want to add more texture to the wood that we've drawn, to the floor, and to the flowers as well. This means focusing on how we can use pen and lines that we draw to really evoke texture and evoke a sense of depth and detail on the surfaces in our drawing. I'm lightly shading these floorboards, which will add a little bit of a contrast to the other shapes of white. We can then add shadows over top of it to really make the door look like it's letting in light as well as the windows. If you're feeling bold, you can even use these perspective lines to add more detail to the windows, creating more of a light and breezy architectural feel. This could include adding panes of glass or other kind of ornate elements on the windshield, on the windows, or the outside area of this greenhouse. Again, this isn't a perspective class, and this might be kind of tricky to do, but I'd encourage you to consider focusing on detail rather than making sure the perspective looks technically correct. It can be really fun to kind of create a story with your drawing. We also want to make sure that it does look like this is an actual greenhouse with translucent and transparent windows. So we can add some vague outlines of shapes behind the windows, like our trusty mountain shape or trees, and then gently and very lightly shade in the upper element or upper area of those shapes. For example, I'm shading in the top kind of line of this mountain shape to make it look like we can see the silhouette of that through the glass. You can also add lines of shading on parts of the glass to make it look like there's a tiny little bit of a reflection or the light is traveling differently through parts of the greenhouse. You can see here elements of dark combined with elements or areas where I didn't shade at all can kind of give the illusion of glass because of the way that light kind of acts differently when it crosses the glass in different areas.
Thank you so much for joining me in this Strathmore Artist Workshop. It's been a joy to draw with you, and I'm so excited to hear your questions or chat more about the drawing techniques that we've used in this class or the supplies that I'm using. Speaking of supplies, you can see all the supplies I used in these workshops right below these videos. I hope you keep drawing. I hope you keep adding color to your pen drawings, and I'm so excited to hear about what you create next. Thanks for watching.